A conceptual framework is one of the most important parts of academic research because it serves as the foundation that guides your entire study. It is a visual or written structure that explains how the main concepts, variables, and factors in your research are related to each other. In simple terms, it is like a map that shows where your study is going and what paths it will take to get there. Many students and researchers confuse it with a theoretical framework, but there is a clear difference. A theoretical framework comes from existing theories that you apply to your research, while a conceptual framework can combine theories, ideas, and your own assumptions to create a structure that fits your specific study. So when you create a conceptual framework, you are basically identifying the key elements of your research and drawing logical connections between them to show how one factor influences another. The first step to creating a conceptual framework is identifying your main research problem because the framework is built around it. For example, if you are studying the impact of employee motivation on productivity, the research problem might be that organizations are struggling to maintain high productivity levels despite offering incentives. From this problem, you extract the key variables, which in this case are motivation and productivity, but these are not the only variables you might have. There could be mediating or moderating variables like job satisfaction, work environment, or leadership style. Once you know your variables, the next step is to decide the type of relationship between them. For instance, you might assume that higher motivation leads to higher productivity, and job satisfaction acts as a mediator. To make these relationships clear, you draw arrows from one variable to another, showing the direction of influence. This is what makes the conceptual framework visual and easy to understand. However, the framework is not just a diagram. It should also be explained in words. You have to write a clear description of why you chose these variables and why you believe they are related in this way. This explanation is often supported by references to previous studies that have found similar relationships. For example, you can write that past research shows that motivated employees tend to perform better, and satisfaction plays a role in how motivation affects performance. Another important point is that your conceptual framework can be based on an existing model or completely original. Sometimes, researchers adapt models like Maslow's hierarchy of needs or Herzberg's two-factor theory to fit their study. Other times, they create their own models by combining different ideas. Whatever approach you take, the key is to make sure your framework is logical, focused, and aligned with your research objectives. It should not include unnecessary variables that you are not planning to measure, because that will make the framework confusing. A common mistake students make is adding too many variables or including factors that have no direct link to the research question. This weakens the clarity of the framework. Another mistake is not explaining the framework properly in the text and just inserting the diagram without context. Remember that the framework is supposed to help readers understand how you see the problem and how you plan to study it. That is why your explanation should cover what each variable means, what role it plays, and why the connections between variables make sense. For example, if you draw an arrow from motivation to productivity, you need to explain why you think motivation influences productivity based on previous research or logical reasoning. Similarly, if you believe leadership style moderates the relationship between motivation and productivity, you should explain how and why. Apart from explaining relationships, you should also define the scope of your framework. Are you including external factors like economic conditions or company policies? Or are you focusing only on internal factors like employee attitudes? This scope matters because it determines what data you will collect and what you will ignore. Your framework also helps in choosing the right research method, because once you know your variables and their relationships, you can decide whether a qualitative, quantitative, or mixed approach suits your study. For example, if your framework includes measurable variables like salary, performance scores, and motivation levels, you might choose a quantitative approach with surveys and statistical analysis. If your framework focuses on abstract ideas like perceptions and experiences, you might choose interviews and thematic analysis. So the conceptual framework is not just a diagram, it is a planning tool that shapes your entire research design. To create a good framework, follow a structured process. Define your research problem. Identify the main concepts, review the literature to find relationships, decide how variables connect, draw a visual diagram, and then write a detailed explanation. Tools like Microsoft PowerPoint, Word, or online diagram creators can help you make neat diagrams. Some people even use research software for this. The main goal is clarity, so keep the design simple and easy to read. If you have too many arrows going in all directions, your framework will confuse readers. Instead, organize it logically, starting from independent variables on one side, then mediators or moderators in the middle, and finally dependent variables on the other side. This flow makes it easier to understand. In the end, a strong conceptual framework will make your research focused and credible because it shows that you have a clear understanding of what you are studying and why. Without it, your research can lack direction and look unorganized.